PFF 2021 Free Agency Live Show. I'm Austin Gale with some of the guys from PFF, Mike Renner, Brad Spielberger, and Eric Eager, though probably should be introducing myself as a Lord of the Rings character. Yesterday we were on with Steve Palazzolo, 6'10", Brad Spielberger, 6'7", and you, 6'3". I'm a normal height, 5'9", 5'10" in my Tinder bio. I swear that's fine. But when you go with a 6'10"er, you know, you're going to look like a point guard here. But we're recapping a lot of free agency news. We were live a lot of yesterday. Going to look at some of the stuff that happened late last night and this morning, starting with the most insane signing of the day, in my opinion, Hunter Henry, signing for 3 years, $37.5 million, $25 million guaranteed to the New England Patriots, who already signed a monster deal for Juju Smith. How much 12 personnel are the New England Patriots going to play to actually return some of this value, getting both Hunter Henry and Juju Smith?
We talked about this yesterday. I mean, Cam's best year came with Greg Olsen at tight end and a couple speed receivers, right? And then they went double down on the tight end. I don't understand it. I know there's a decent amount of efficiency in throwing to tight ends and playing 12 personnel, but a lot of that is basically like, you know, for instance, old data, but also early down data. What happens when they get into 3rd down and 7 and you can't play 12 personnel all the time? To me, that's the question about New England. How versatile of a passing offense will you actually have?
Do you think that Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar move the needle for the Patriots offense, or is it just going to be the tight end show in New England?
I mean, a little bit. I think they're upgrades, obviously, over what they had there. You know, Demir Bird. They really had the bottom of the barrel in terms of talent offensively at the wide receiver position. But it is this tight ends. This is what the sort of play of the offseason is what they tried last year to get with Dalton Keene and Devin Asiasi in the 3rd round. Obviously, punting on those picks already with their replacements. They're trying to harken back to the early 2010s. Aaron Hernandez, Rob Gronkowski, that's when that Patriots offense was humming. They're obviously trying to zig when the rest of the NFL is zagging with this, 12 personnel that they're going to be running there in New England. And the Hunter Henry deal on its face doesn't look crazy, but it's when you pair it with the Juju Smith deal, it's like, what are they really going to do with these two guys? But I do think it fits with Cam Newton and what they did last year with him as a runner. And I think it sneakily could put them in the mix for someone like Trey Lance in this draft class.
I can't get out of my head the 2010 divisional playoff game with Rex Ryan, right? Just like clamped down on that team, the 2 tight end team that they had with wide receivers that were sort of no better than what they're going to go into next year. To me, it's a question about versatility. Like, do they add another playmaker on that side of the ball to stretch the field? Because right now, that's where they struggled. They really didn't win a Super Bowl until later on in the Gronk era because they didn't have the versatility on the outside or the backside of the backfield that, and James White probably is going to leave, so that there leaves a hole there too.
I mean, the Patriots could look to continue to spend. Right now, they spent over $130 million guaranteed on Juju Smith, Hunter Henry, Kendrick Bourne, and Nelson Aguilar on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, Matthew Judon, Devon Godchow, Jalen Mills, Dietrich Wise, and Henry Anderson. $130 million. How close is that to the record guaranteed money in an offseason?
Yeah, they're already in 2nd place, and we've heard from several sources that they're not done spending. The Dolphins in 2020 spent about $147 million in total guarantees. The Patriots are already at $137. It can't be understated how different this is than their normal approach. Like you said, they traded up twice in the 3rd round for tight ends last year. Coming into that year, since the rookie wage scale in 2011, Belichick had traded down 22 times and only up 9 times. Trades up for both of those tight ends, and they're gone, or they're not going to be used pretty much right away.
It is worth noting, though, this is the single worst stretch of drafting in the Bill Belichick era. They do not have talent across that roster. That's why they bottomed out to 7-9 last year. Bill Belichick's still obviously a great defensive coach, but you need to fill all these holes because you have all these holes, because you don't have young guys there, and you don't have guys even signed through 2022, really. You only have a handful of guys that are sort of pieces that they are building around there, so this is why they can make moves like that, is because they're pushing a lot of this money to future years, like everyone else kind of is this offseason, and they have that space in those future years.
Another big signing to jump on right now is Shaquille Griffin signing with the Jacksonville Jaguars on a $44.5 million deal that includes $29 million guaranteed. Shaquille Griffin, cornerback 1 for the Jacksonville Jaguars. They've signed a lot of depth players to start, but now Shaquille Griffin, legitimate starter, cornerback 1 in Jacksonville. Brad, I'll start with you. What do you think of that money for Shaq Griffin?
Yeah, it's a good deal. They were giving kind of 2nd-tier and 3rd-tier guys some decent money, and now I think they get Shaq Griffin at a solid value. $13.33 million per year over 3 years. By all accounts, was considered, if not the, one of the best corners on the market this offseason. So that's a solid signing.
Yeah, I like the move as well. I do think that you look at that roster and the defensive secondary that they had there. You had C.J. Henderson, no one. You had no one whatsoever, and I think what this does is continues to build up what we call the second most important position on the football field. It doesn't mean they should be done there, whether it's in the draft, whether it's more in free agency, but it just means that now you have 2 reliable pieces there in C.J. Henderson and Shaquille Griffin at, like we said, the most valuable position. That's how you get a pass defense. They obviously know Joe Cullen, the defense coordinator, coming over from Baltimore, where they've built through the secondary wholesale over the past handful of years. Probably taking the same approach there in Jacksonville.
The Jacksonville Jaguars have quietly spent a ton of money this offseason, but not on a lot of Tier 1 talent, maybe outside of Shaquille Griffin, depending on your evaluation. 3 years, $24.4 million for Roy Robertson Harris. You have 3 years worth up to $21 million for Jamal Agnew. 2 years, $14 million for Dwayne Smoot. 2 years, $6 million for former Ohio State running back Carlos Hyde. And then recently, 4 years, $35 million for Sean Jenkins. 2 years, $7.25 million for Chris Manhertz. And then obviously the Shaquille Griffin. Are they trying to quickly build around Trevor Lawrence with a lot of Tier 2, Tier 3 talent?
Well, it kind of was in the same situation we just talked about with the Patriots. They had slashed this roster left and right, and obviously just pushed a ton of this new draft capital that they're getting back into this year, into the future here. So they're going to be a complete reset, and they're basically just making sure that they're not completely bottomed out. They're not putting Trevor Lawrence in a Sam Darnold situation where you really have nothing whatsoever around you as a roster.
Something I want to jump to next is some late-night edge defender deals. We saw Trey Hendrickson sign a 4-year deal worth $60 million with the Cincinnati Bengals, and then former Cincinnati Bengal Carl Lawson, 3-year, $45 million deal with the New York Jets, both at $15 million in average salary per year. I know you hate this move. You hate the Cincinnati Bengals letting Carl Lawson walk just to replace him with Trey Hendrickson.
They did it twice. They did it yesterday with the Carl Lawson move, and they did it today with the Chidobe Awuzie move, likely now letting William Jackson go. I imagine that's a done deal wherever he does end up. But I just think it's bad business. It sends a bad message to your locker room saying, hey, we're going to go to the outside for replacements for guys that were proven players. They took a first-round pick on William Jackson. They're going to let that guy walk out the door. Now you're not going to get a compensatory pick for him either because you signed these two guys to replace them. So I just think that is not what you see the teams that reload. They reload through the draft. You don't go find your replacements for the guys that you drafted that were on your roster via free agency for damn near the same price point.
I mean, my biggest takeaway from these signings is that if you don't value pass rushers, early in the draft, you're going to end up paying a lot of money, $15 million average per year for Trey Hendrickson types. I mean, you saw the same. Judon got a lot of money. Shaquille Barrett close to 17, 18 million. And then when you compare that to the highest paid center in the NFL is making 12.5 mil. Like there are more valuable positions on the NFL marketplace. And then Trey Hendrickson, you're going to end up paying him because you just haven't valued pass rushers in Cincinnati for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, Mike talked about the Patriots where they have a lot of needs, right? And he talks about needs are where free agency comes in and values where draft come in. But it actually is in the other direction, right? You get needs on your roster because you are bad at drafting. And in many cases, like, it's also the salary cap thing. Like, you are bad at drafting edge players, you're going to need to pay up for them, right? Like, the Frank Clark deal, for example, was a product of whiffing on Tano Passanio and Breeland Speaks. And so, when you look at this, like, it's partially just like a lot of these are sort of teams chasing, right? Mm-hmm. And the Bengals sort of even worse in the sense that they actually hit on a draft pick in round, middle round draft with Carl Lawson and decide not to keep him or decide not to pay an extra couple million to get a guy like Trey Hendrickson who has a worse profile statistically.
I mean, again, I think not all needs are created equal here. Like, obviously you fill needs in free agency, but having a need at edge defender is going to cost you so much more money than maybe having a need at safety, tight end, center, interior offensive line, etc. Like, you can get Leonard Williams for $16 million average per year, like the Los Angeles Rams did. Or you can pay Joe Thuney as the highest paid guard in the NFL for $16 million. Like, not all needs are the same. That's why going into the draft, you want to hit on rookies as pass rushers, interior defensive linemen, offensive tackles, and QBs. And I think you're seeing that full force here, even though the edge market has kind of come down a little bit. I thought maybe a Shaquille Barrett could clear $20 million average per year. But how much of that is Shaquille Barrett maybe not being in that tier with Frank Clark, Khalil Mack, etc., or just the lowered salary cap 8% down from the previous year?
I think it's a mix of both, but I do think there is a bit of an adjustment. We've seen teams, we discussed it a bit yesterday, but D Ford, even Frank Clark in Kansas City, these guys that almost like the quarterback position where if you came to market, you were a good player there, you were going to break the bank. We also saw trades involving first-round picks, and then those guys were getting huge money. I think the thing that sticks out to me, you mentioned Leonard Floyd in LA as well, at $16 million per year, and Hendrickson, at 15, is teams are still paying for sacks. I think one of the things that we love to tout here is that we've done a good job of emphasizing that pressures and winning your pass rush one-on-one is more important and more replicable than just getting sacks, and teams still don't really seem to be adjusting to that reality.
Jumping to a new signing, Jameis Winston staying in New Orleans. I think he signed that late last night or this morning, worth up to $12 million. I think it's a base salary of $5.5 million. Is he the obvious starter in New Orleans? And what is the ceiling or I guess the win total you're projecting for the New Orleans Saints with Jameis Winston for 16 games.
I mean, I would have said he was the obvious starter, except for the fact that Taysom Hill started over him last year. Now Taysom Hill signed a $140 million deal. So obviously,
4 years included.
I'm kidding, but I do think he should be the obvious starter, though. Like, you're not going 16 games with Taysom Hill and expecting to make the playoffs. I'm not sure you're going 16 games with Jameis Winston and expect to make the playoffs either, but he at least gives you that opportunity. He can at least lead a passing game at somewhat of a high level in certain games against certain teams. Maybe not 16 games a year, but maybe 10 to 12.
Yeah, what is the goal for the New Orleans Saints, right? Like, to go 7-9, like, you're in a division with Tampa Bay, the former Super Bowl champion, and Jameis Winston has the upside to compete with those. But he also has the downside to be picking in the top 10 as well, which I think is what you really want. Taysom Hill, I think Sean Payton showed last season, he can build an offense for them to win half their games with him, right? Because there's enough bad teams in the NFL for Taysom Hill to take advantage of it. But that doesn't help move the franchise and the New Orleans Saints forward at all. Getting Jameis on this deal, having him perform like a franchise quarterback, signing him to a deal, that's one good outcome. Him flaming completely out and getting them a top 5 pick is also a good outcome for New Orleans. So I see him as the starter, and I think last season was more of a ploy for them to sort of like work around and just get the 1 or 2 seed and also sort of keep Jameis cheap for this offseason, which ended up happening.
Here's another interesting wrinkle there, too, is according to Jane Slater at NFL Network, the Saints are also still looking at Mitchell Trubisky as a depth option. Maybe take a smaller deal and kind of grind and then try to get a bigger payday later on. But yeah, so they're not done there at quarterback 100%.
I will say, have too many quarterbacks, I guess.
About the Saints, there's not a single position on this roster they got better at this offseason. They just didn't. Now, in the draft, they might add some guy to maybe make somewhere better, but every single positional group is going to either be status quo or take a step back. And that is a bad position to be in when you are a roster. You don't have a position where you can say there's going to be progression here. And at that point, regression hits, they're going to take a big step back in 2021. I'd be surprised if this team makes the playoffs.
Yeah, you could make an argument that among the positions that changed, quarterback changed the least, right? Because Drew Brees had fallen off so much, his arm strength had deteriorated so much, and Jameis is 1 year removed from leading the league in passing yards. I mean, again, I think this is the only strong move that they made so far in quite some time.
Brad, I'm going to stick with you. I want to look a little bit forward with New Orleans Saints. How are they going to resign, or what are they going to do to keep Marshawn Lattimore, to keep Ryan Ramczyk, Eric McCoy? Like, they've drafted so well, and they already signed Alvin Kamara to a big monster deal. Like, how are they going to keep some of this talent in New Orleans?
Yeah, so they announced another restructure today to Teron Armstead, the left tackle, who's in the final year of his deal. I thought maybe an extension could come there. So they're now actually in like only $7 million over the cap, started about 100, so it's been a pretty impressive march for them. They have to now look to extend these 3 guys that are on these big 1-year deals. So Marcus Williams, their franchise tag safety, Marshawn Lattimore, corner, and Ryan Ramczyk at right tackle. I think they tried to get that over the cap number as low as possible to kind of not have so much leverage with those guys, basically saying you need cap space, so I'm going to kind of hold you hostage. They've worked, to get away from that, but it's still going to be a challenge. I think 2022 is going to be just as much of a challenge as this year.
All right, I want to jump now to the Jets, which in the past has been kind of a laughingstock in the NFL. But I think recently with Robert Saleh, Joe Douglas making some power moves this offseason, signing Corey Davis to a 3-year, $37.5 million contract. That puts him from an average per year perspective at 21 among the receivers in the NFL. And then Carl Lawson, we spoke to that deal a little bit ago, 3 years, $45 million with $30 million guaranteed for Robert Saleh's defense. Also signed Jared Davis, former first rounder with the Lions, worth up to $7 million. I don't hate it as a reclamation project. Up to $7 million. Let's get the incentives rolling. I'll start with you, Eric. What's your opinion of the Jets, the new look Jets trying to make some moves?
Yeah, this is shaping up to be a situation where they're doing, they're putting things in the right place for Saleh's defense. They're putting in some pieces in place for the guy that they'll draft it to. Remember when they took Darnold, they had to trade the Quentin Nelson pick plus 3 or 4 other picks to put him in what ended up being a really crappy position. That being said, this looks like, when you look at the market, they were 14-1 to win the AFC East yesterday. They're 15-1 now. Maybe it's softening a little bit on my dream, which is for them to take on Deshaun Watson. Because I think Watson, is a difference maker that can really help them in an AFC where, like, if you're looking at the AFC now, Buffalo, Kansas City, the Chargers with a pretty good quarterback, Indy, Baltimore,
Cleveland.
It's Cleveland. It's going to be really hard to sort of ascend here. It's a lot easier in the NFC. I don't know if the Jets, swing for the fence here or they sort of play. It looks like these free agency signings mean that they're going to be playing for like 2023 or so.
We talked about it this morning on the 2-for-1 Drafts podcast, but what do you think these signings have do you think they have any impact on what they're going to do at number 2 overall?
No, I don't foresee this having. That's a completely different conversation. anything they do here should not impact it, besides obviously a possible Darnold trade when and if that does happen. But to me, this is good news if you're a Jets fan. This is about as good an offseason and last offseason as you can imagine. This is a vastly different approach than the team that signed C.J. Mosley to a 5-year, $85 million deal. Signed Le'Veon Bell to a 4-year, $52.5 million deal just a couple of off seasons ago. Like, this is a team that's making smart moves, shorter term decisions, not locked in with as much money to longer years, not signing contracts that you're already planning on how to get out of down the road. They're planning on contracts at valuable positions in wide receiver, edge now in this year's free agency class, offensive line in last year's free agency class, and not committing big sums of money and big sums of guaranteed money to these guys to where they have some flexibility. This is more roster plugging at valuable positions than it is trying to build your roster, trying to build an entire roster through free agency. They know that's what the draft is for, and that's what they're going to be doing with that number 2 overall pick.
I think an interesting contract trend that Corey Davis's deal really shows us is that what we're seeing so far this offseason is the total values are coming down, but Corey Davis's $27 million fully guaranteed at signing is 9th at the wide receiver position. So you're bringing the total values down, but you're still giving very strong guarantees that are up there with deals worth $15 to $20 million. And those guys are going to get the guarantees and then hit free agency again in 2023 when the cap's expected to spike. So the total values are kind of looking like it's a suppressed market, but guarantees are what matter at the end of the day. So this is a strong deal for Corey Davis.
Definitely always important. PFF's resident salary cap expert, Brad Spielberger. Look at the guarantees. The guarantees matter massively when you're trying to evaluate these contracts. I want to jump now to one of my favorite signings of free agency, just because it's going to be really fun to watch the Washington football team next year with Ryan Fitzmagic, 1-year, $10 million deal to come in as the starter. Maybe Taylor Heineke does compete with Ryan Fitzpatrick, but he's going to come in as the starter. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick to Washington, if anything, they weren't going to compete for a Super Bowl next year regardless. They weren't in a position to make a prime play for a quarterback in this draft class. Needed to have kind of this stopgap option. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick brings some fun to DC.
Yeah, absolutely. And half of the APY of Teddy Bridgewater, 60% of what it is for Ben Roethlisberger, less than Taysom Hill. You're in a position at pick 19 where there's probably not going to be an elite passer there. That's one of the downfalls of winning a crappy division, and why, what Philadelphia did on that last football game of the regular season matters a lot, right? And we talk about this sort of dynamic here, but if Fitzpatrick puts you in there, you have a good defense. You lost Darby yesterday, but you got a good front seven. On offense, you have Terry McLaurin, you have Logan Thomas, you have a decent offensive line. He puts you in there, and again, much like Jameis Winston, if he plays really well, you're competing for a playoff spot. If he plays really poorly, you're now in a position to draft one of the top players in the next crop of quarterbacks. So that's I think a good place. Whereas we've seen other teams with sort of this caretaker quarterback like Bridgewater. Carolina's now like a decent distance away from the top pick because Bridgewater played okay last year, and that's kind of not really what you want. You want the barbell sort of distribution for a quarterback, either great or awful, because awful gets you a good pick.
Yeah, if you're going to get a bridge quarterback, I'd rather have Ryan Fitzpatrick or Jameis Winston rather than a Teddy Bridgewater or Andy Dalton, where they're being more conservative with the football and likely to get you a 7-win season, while Fitzpatrick's either losing all but 2 games or going maybe 10, 11 wins and taking them to the postseason again after what was a really successful season. What do you think, Renner, what do you think Fitzpatrick does for Terry McLaurin's value?
Oh, I think it increases it. He is a guy who is going to, one, not take a lot of sacks. I think that's one of the biggest things here. You don't have a great offensive line in Washington. You can't sign a guy who is going to hold on to the ball there and try to get killed. That's not been Ryan Fitzpatrick over the course of his career. He's going to sling it up, and he's going to go down the football field more so than Alex Smith ever did, more so than Dwayne Haskins ever did, more so than any of those quarterbacks they had there in that fold did in Washington. So I think Terry McLaurin, obviously Ryan Fitzpatrick did wonders for Devontae Parker's stock there in Miami. I think it's going to be similar for Terry McLaurin.
All right, and now I want to jump to the Tennessee Titans. The Tennessee Titans late last night signed Bud Dupree to a pretty monster deal, one of the higher paid edges on the open market. Also signed Danico Autry to a pretty decent deal along the defensive line, while letting Corey Davis and Jonnu Smith obviously walk. Brad, what are your initial thoughts on the Titans moves of late?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Bud Dupree is he was always playing opposite T.J. Watt and Cam Hayward. So we always talk about a lot of unblocked pressures, just not a lot of attention on him. And he goes to a Titans unit that was very poor in pass rushing last year. Obviously brought in Jadeveon Clowney on a 1-year flyer, brought in Vic Beasley on a 1-year flyer. Neither of those deals worked out at all. And now they give him, the second biggest deal at edge rusher, just under Shaq Barrett. So he's got his work cut out for him.
I do think that the Tennessee Titans, I don't hate the Danico Autry move, but the Bud Dupree move, it's going to be difficult for him to really match that value? Because he's never been the guy. And you've talked about a ton about getting pass rushers from good teams and then trying to have them on a bad team have similar success, while as the other way around, like Carl Lawson from the Bengals, it's maybe easier to project him having more success in New York.
Yes, because there's opportunities there when you're a team that's leading a lot, when you have a lot of other guys there that teams have to pay attention to. That's about as favorable an opportunity as you're going to get from an edge rusher. And now he does rush against left tackles. It's obviously harder to rush against left tackles than it is against right tackles. But even still, the pass rushing grades, the consistency of it, he's a one-year wonder in terms of a grading perspective. That 2019 season, even this past year, took a step backwards from that. And he's coming off an ACL injury. To give him what he got in this market compared to what some of the other more budget options got is just, it speaks to the desperation of the Titans at the edge position. They gave it to Vic Beasley last year. They gave it to Jadeveon Clowney last year. They want that guy. And I still don't think they really found that guy in Bud Dupree.
And it comes back again to when you don't value the edge position in the draft, or you miss on edge players in the draft, you're going to end up paying this kind of money to guys that maybe aren't even top 5, top 8 at their position. And I think that's where you put yourself in a salary cap bind like the Kansas City Chiefs are in. Chris Jones is very good, top 3 at his position, but Frank Clark, I think on the books for over $20 million cap hit in 2021. Very unfortunate stuff for the Kansas City Chiefs. All right, jumping to another signing that I didn't hate. Some people gave this some hate. I think you did. Dalvin Tomlinson, the Minnesota Vikings. 2 years, $22 million. And I think the reason you hate it is because they already have Michael Pierce, obviously coming back from, I think he opted out of the season due to COVID-19. Both of them kind of play the same position, both nose tackles, but some Minnesota Vikings reporters are projecting Tomlinson to play 3-tech, not the ideal pass rusher in the 3-tech role, but what's your initial reaction to $11 million APY for Dalvin Tomlinson?
Yeah, Dalvin Tomlinson's a great player, but in this case, it's like signing a backup running back for the same price as your highly paid running back. Tomlinson last season, when lined up at nose tackle, had an 86 pass rush grade. When lined up anywhere but nose tackle, it was 63. He had 10% of his rushes were pressures from nose, 7% from anywhere outside of nose, and it's easier to get pressure the further away from the center you are on an offense. So even if those numbers were the same, it would be a silly thing, right? The Vikings went from having Sheldon Richardson at the 3-tech, who played really well, but again, as Brad said, you pay for sacks. He had 1 sack that year, ton of pressures. They let him go, right? Try to replace him with Shamar Stephen, who's a nose, who they try to play a 3-tech, and he was garbage at that. And so instead of rethinking the process, they just got a better version of Shamar Stephen here at the 3-tech, which again, and they gravitate towards the last thing they saw. The last thing most Vikings fans saw was Alvin Kamara rushing for 18 touchdowns against them on Christmas Day. When in reality, if the Saints didn't run the ball once that game, they still would have beat the Vikings because their secondary stinks, right? And now they're out of the market for guys like Sherman and so on.
What's your opinion of Dalvin Tomlinson at 3-tech?
I think that what they wanted was the run defense. They were so porous up the middle last year, probably the worst defensive tackle group in the NFL, but it also was because their edge rushers were gone too from the year prior. Obviously, Danielle Hunter hurt all of last season. Like, the entire defensive line was out. And so I think it's a tad bit of an overreaction, but again, $11 million is not a ton of money over 2 years, $11 million per year over 2 years. I don't think it's a ton of money to say, hey, now we feel really good about our defense. We got Michael Pierce. We got Dalvin Tomlinson. I'd feel a lot better paying those 2 guys $10 million a year than I would paying one Leonard Williams $20 million a year. Because that gives you a good run defense. One Leonard Williams doesn't necessarily do that all on its own.
I also think Dalvin Tomlinson, big locker room guy. For those who don't know, one of the first guys I ever interviewed in my sports media career, big-time wrestler in high school, superstar. Also, academic scholarship to Harvard. Ended up going to Alabama for athletics, obviously. Dalvin Tomlinson coming in to bring that locker room up. Mike, I know you don't love those takes, but I have them here for you.
I think this just makes the Michael Pierce signing look worse. Dalvin Tomlinson in a vacuum, is a pretty good football player. It's just the Minnesota Vikings, again, rudderless as far as an approach to football. It just doesn't seem like any of that makes sense.
All right, I want to jump to lower tier deal, and then we'll start to get to some rumors here. But Tyus Bowser signing 4-year, $22 million base deal worth up to $27 million. When I first saw it, 4 years, multi-year contract for Tyus Bowser, didn't love it. But when you think about this is going to be coming in at less than $6 million APY. That is a good deal for a team that the Baltimore Ravens, Mike and I have talked about this a ton on our podcast, does not invest highly at the pass rusher position, from a paid cap perspective. They draft and develop, and Tyus Bowser was a guy they drafted, keeping him in-house on a budget and they kept Pernell McPhee at another very low volume or low dollar deal. I think this is a strong move for the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, I like it because the 4 years. You have him for 4 years at a fairly cheap dollar amount, and his thing coming out of Houston. He was a super athlete, not a polished football player whatsoever. That was, it was going to take him a while to turn it on. And he started to come around as a pass rusher, as a complete player. They use him a lot in those blitz packages to then drop in coverage because he is that athletic. He can handle real coverage roles. And I think for that scheme and for kind of the player he is, you could see his best football being ahead of him. And then to let those two guys walk, they let walk, Yannick Ngakoue, Matthew Judon, get those fourth-round compensatory picks for that, and then keep a guy in-house who can maybe be as good as them next year or in the next couple years. I mean, that's a W.
Well, you're also in the draft in a position to get one of the edge guys because that's sort of the sweet spot there. But look, I mean, think about this. This is why a team like Baltimore is considered smart and a team like Tennessee might not be. You know, Bud Dupree last year, less than 11% of his plays were wins by our grading system. Bowser and Pernell McPhee's old ass after like 10 years, 15%. Both of those guys at 15%. The Ravens know, and it isn't so much about these two particular guys. It's the system plus those two particular guys, which is why they can move on from relatively productive players like Judon every single time.
We really liked all the moves the Ravens have made because we didn't bring up Kevin Zeitler, too. 3 years, $22.5 million.
No compensatory pick on that one.
And that's the thing there, too, is that the Ravens have now, they've earned 53 compensatory picks since 1994, the first year those were installed. Most in the NFL by 6, Cowboys at 47. So their process holistically, you let these edges leave. They're going to get a third or fourth probably for both Yannick Ngakoue and Matthew Judon. They keep, as you said, a guy, Tyus Bowser, who could be just as good, and just keep it rolling.
All right, I'm going to jump now to, I was hoping to have details on this before I brought it onto the show, but Chidobe Awuzie signing a 3-year deal with the Cincinnati Bengals. I know one of the first things you said, obviously he's going to be replacing William Jackson. They're going to let him walk, but better scheme fit than maybe William Jackson was for them?
I mean, yeah.
I'm trying to get some positives here. We're in Cincinnati. We're based in Cincinnati.
William Jackson more of a man quarter, Chidobe Awuzie more of a zone corner. Yeah, you can see it being more of a scheme fit. And like, I can accept that portion of it. Again, I thought you could have done more with William Jackson or scheme better when you have one of the better man corners in the NFL and put him on an island or done a lot more with him than they did. Because I think it's in 2020, 2021, if you're still trying to shoehorn guys specifically into your scheme and not being able to scheme to your talent, that's on you, not them.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I think about the Bengals ever since they got Zach Taylor. They've been spending way more than the Bengals normally have. And you look at him, he's won 6 games in 2 seasons. Brad, like, this is like a make or break time for the Bengals franchise, right? Because if they whiff on a lot of these, it doesn't matter what scheme he fits in because they're going to get fired in a year, right? Yeah. And they're going to have a whole new coaching staff in the coming years. And so to me, like, this is again another one where, after Lewis, it was like, we're gonna spend, and it's like, but they haven't really gotten results from it.
Yeah, they never seem to spend. And last year, DJ Reader and Trey Waynes, and those guys played, I want to say, a combined 3 games last year for them. So obviously didn't go very well at all. And the thing, too, is they're also generally a player in the compensatory pick game. But now you lose Lawson, and you wipe it out with the Trey Hendrickson signing. They're going to lose William Jackson for probably a decent deal. Also wipe that out with an Awuzie signing. So from a process standpoint, definitely deviating from their norms. And yeah, it's a make or break time.
There was a second there where I thought they might just let Lawson go, let Jackson go, sign maybe a Gabe Jackson, a Trey Turner, be smart, get 2 third-rounders back in return and play a longer game here.
But they don't have that time, right? Zach Taylor has 1 year probably to. If they don't win 8 games next year, I mean, is he going to? Because they've won 6 in 2 years and have not looked competitive for much of the time.
Yeah, I mean, it was not a sure thing at the season's end that he was going to be back this year. It was
but
definitely
the Bengals for a long time. The owner has been really adamant about giving coaches a long leash. I mean, we saw that with Marvin Lewis and all these guys. And what I've heard, Solomon Wilcots, fellow PFFer, who's been in the Cincinnati Bengals locker room a ton, says the culture that Zach Taylor has brought with Sam Hubbard, Jesse Bates has been good. So I do think that the culture.
Has it? I mean, Carlos Dunlap.
Yeah,
those guys are from the old guard, Mike. All right, I'm going to jump to some teams that I don't think we've brought up a ton because they haven't made too many cannonball splashes in free agency, but have made some moves. Buffalo Bills, they re-signed Darrell Williams, 3 years, $24 million contract with up to $14 million in guaranteed money. Matt Milano, 4 years, $41.5 million, $23.5 million guaranteed, and then also brought back John Feliciano for 3 years, $17 million deal. What has been your opinion of what the Bills are doing?
I mean, getting Darrell Williams back for that deal when you see the team like Jacksonville Jaguars tagging Cam Robinson, probably a worse tackle, at least last year, than Darrell Williams. They're probably tagging him for what he could be in the future.
$8 million a year.
That's all he's been. But $8 million for any starting caliber tackle in the NFL nowadays is an insane deal. I'm surprised he didn't want to test the waters more in free agency. But yeah, I think that's kind of a team like the Bills are building that culture of trying to retain guys, and that's a good way to build a team.
I mean, I also really like the John Feliciano deal. Like, you bring him in as a depth piece that can play multiple positions along the offensive line. I think he's also played center in his time. Let's jump on the Matt Milano deal, though. He comes in making a decent chunk of change, one of the bigger linebacker contracts we've seen, but still, C.J. Mosley is making more than him. Zach Cunningham is making more than him. Miles Jack, not even breaking the market, resetting the market. Even more recent signings, Littleton and Schober signed for a higher average APY than Matt Milano does. What's your opinion of him as a player and that value?
Yeah, I think he's a great scheme fit for them. Obviously didn't have his best year this past year, but has been one of the better cover linebackers in years past. And they're kind of all in. Like, this is it. You still got Josh Allen cheap for a year, this next year, and then obviously the 5th-year option kind of cheap-ish. So this is your window, 2 years of being able to put maybe a little bit more out there than some of these guys might be worth. But then if you win a Super Bowl, if you get the Super Bowl, it comes back in return. So I do think that this is kind of what the Bills are doing right now, similar to what kind of the Chiefs have done the past couple of years.
Another team I wanted to touch on that's made a couple moves here but hasn't gotten a ton of love, but Carolina Panthers signing Pat Elflein, 3 years, $13.5 million, $6 million guaranteed. That was a poor...
These haven't gotten a lot of love?
They haven't gotten a lot of love. Deal grader on PFF.com, which you can check out. And if you do go to PFF.com, Free Agency 30 gives you 30% off any PFF subscription. That's promo code FreeAgency30. But deal grader here, Pat Elflein, 3 years, $13.5 million. That was poor, according to PFF.com. And then Cam Irving, 2 years, $10 million, below average for Cam Irving. How in the hell are the Carolina Panthers going to overcome some of these offensive line additions?
I don't know what they're like. Those are not who I would want to be relying on. At least they're cheap-ish. But this is just throwing shit at a wall, for lack of a better term, seeing what sticks. That is what you are doing right now.
I think spaghetti is the actual
You're hoping you have God himself as your offensive line coach this coming fall, because that's...
I think my favorite analysis from Mike Renner on the show has been, I don't know what they're doing. And I think that's always pretty valuable to see. All right, I'm going to move to some rumors now. Going to get into some rumors here. Seahawks apparently making a strong push for Lombardi Lenny, while the Bucs are making a move for James White, or trying to get into James White's camp. What is your opinion of the Seahawks not giving Rashad Penny, former first-rounder, finally the reins? Because obviously Chris Carson likely going to walk as an unrestricted free agent. You bring in Lombardi Lenny to pair with Rashad Penny. Do they recommit to the run? How do you see this move planning out for the Seahawks?
Well, this is the one aspect we didn't touch on the Shaquille Griffin thing is what the heck are they going to do at cornerback?
Yeah.
Like, he is
Rashad
gone.
Penny's playing at corner.
He is gone from Seattle. He was your best.
He could probably be a pretty good
coverage.
corner.
He was your best cornerback by far, and it was not really even close there. And Jamal Adams, God love him. He is a strong safety. He is a box safety. What he does as a deep coverage impact player is nowhere near what he does as a box impact player. He is not the guy that is going to be that steady presence that is going to put a quote-unquote cap on your defense. You don't have that guy anymore. You don't have really anyone now in your secondary, and I'm not sure what year they're building their team for, but 2021 is not the year.
I always think to myself about the Seahawks, what if DK Metcalf didn't fall to them at the back half of the second round of the 2019 draft? Where would this team be? I don't know if they've made like a good decision in an awful long time. And this Leonard Fournette thing would absolutely. I don't know what Russell Wilson would do here. Like, are they really going to start over and move on? I don't have words for what the Seahawks are doing.
What do you think of the James White fit in Tampa Bay? I think that's a dream. I think James White should take less money
James
to go
White,
to Tampa
yeah.
Bay. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, obviously, it is where James White, Tom Brady throws to backs. I don't care who they are. I mean, they're Leonard Fournette, and he throws to him. And Leonard Fournette's not a receiving back whatsoever. So he's going to throw to his running backs. James White probably one of, if not the best receiving running back, pure running back in the NFL. And so that makes a ton of sense. You can actually, that's where we say gain value at the running back position when you are that skilled at that position as a receiver. And so I don't think it'll cost too much.
And Tampa might regress this year, and they might be playing from behind more. I mean, the thing with Ronald Jones and with Leonard Fournette, and the reason some people were tricked into seeing their value last year was Tampa Bay led a lot, right? So they were able to run the clock out with those two, sort of more bruising backs, guys who weren't quite as good of receivers. If they're behind more and they have to play those game scripts, James White might be more valuable than we think he is to that team.
I like what Mike did, bringing up the Seattle Seahawks secondary. It's like, what do you do now that you lose Shaquille Griffin? I kind of want to bring up a similar circumstance. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, offensive tackles Zach Banner, Matt Filer, and Alejandro Villanueva are unrestricted free agents. And right now, projected starting offensive line for Pittsburgh and Big Ben, Jaron Jones, Kevin Dotson, B.J. Finney, David DeCastro, and Chukwuma Okorafor.
Jaron Jones played D-tackle at Notre Dame.
I'm not sure how the Pittsburgh Steelers, with Big Ben and how bad he played, I think he ranked outside the top 20 in PFF grade this past season. How do the Pittsburgh Steelers overcome that? Because that's not a one-player fix. That is a 2-3-player fix with multiple weak links.
Well, the scary thing is for the Pittsburgh Steelers, if you watched Ben Roethlisberger play last year, he was terrified of getting hit. He was trying to not get injured. He was obviously, and I don't blame him, he's not at the age where he wanted to be taking hits, and he had that injury that cost him, the elbow injury that cost him the 2019 season. But he is not built to play behind a bad offensive line at this point in his career. He did not look good when protection broke down last season. And it's not going to get any better.
And all the juice is already out of the orange. Big Ben last season, time to throw, 2.17, 0.2 of a second faster than any other quarterback in the NFL.
Wow.
They can't do it anymore. They've already maxed out at all these things, and the offensive line gets worse. The receiving core gets worse because they'll probably lose Juju, and some of those guys who played well last year will probably regress.
James Conner no longer there.
Yeah, there's not a lot of a direction they can go on the passing offense.
I don't know what's going to happen here because I do think that you can't throw the ball any faster, like you're saying there with Big Ben. And I do think that what is the current situation for the Pittsburgh Steelers from a cap space perspective? Can they restructure some deals? Can they make some waves here to go get somebody in the offseason?
Frankly, no. They were coming into this offseason with one of the worst situations. They're a team that generally only guarantees signing bonus, so they're used to pushing money down the line already. And so coming into this offseason, they have a couple moves they can make, maybe extend or restructure Joe Hayden, maybe do something with Cam Hayward's contract. But again, you're talking about 32, 33-year-old guys that you're going to push money further down the line for. When you have 1 year with Roethlisberger left and then a giant question mark, and their average depth of target is going to be about 3 yards at this point. It's a giant question mark.
Best thing, to create space, they're going to have to extend guys in their 30s. They're going to have to give them more years on their deal to try to create space, which, that's not the position you want to be in. I think this was trying to be their 1 year run it back with this aging elder core that they have there. And then a lot of those guys' deals are up after this 2021 season. Then they're going to have a lot of space next off season. But this is kind of lightning in a bottle. There's what they're trying to catch right now, and it doesn't seem like that lightning's there.
Interesting report from Jenna Lane of ESPN. The Bucs actively having conversations with Ndamukong Suh and representatives for Leonard Fournette, Ryan Suckup, and Antonio Brown. They're really just trying to bring them all back. I did not think they'd be able to have the horses or the cap space really to go get all these guys back. Of that group, though, the only guy that I think Ndamukong Suh still has value. Antonio Brown, absolutely, but
Ryan Suckup?
I'm willing to move on from Suckup and Leonard Fournette. Let the Seahawks hand Leonard Fournette a big deal for him to go out west.
What do you guys think about the run it back mantra? It makes more sense with Brady for Tampa than it did with Mahomes in Kansas City last year, right? Because the longer term view of the Chiefs franchise. I actually don't mind it with Tampa. It's like you sucked for 20 years. You got in between Super Bowls. You might as well go for it again.
Also, they're actively trying to run it back by bringing all these guys back. Yeah. I think it's a better mantra. If we want to get into hashtag discourse here on the show, we could definitely do that.
They should definitely though bring back Ndamukong Suh, even just to put Aaron Rodgers on tilt. That dude is in Aaron Rodgers' head. There's no doubt about that. They bring him back just for the mental aspect of Aaron Rodgers seeing that guy lined up across from him. It's in his head a little.
It's also really important to know that the NFC is just winnable, right? It's not the AFC has a lot more just top tier teams, but the NFC, if you just hunker down and take all your guys for the next 2 years, you could be the 1 seed in that conference for those 2 years.
That's obviously not taking the Ryan Fitzpatrick signing into the conversation. That's fine.
There were a lot of reasons to think. Everyone kept saying Brady, year 2 of the Arian system. They could regress in certain places, the offensive line's still thin. You get an injury there or somewhere in the secondary. Yeah, it could happen. They were a pretty healthy team last year. But year 2 of Brady in that system with that receivers could even be better.
And their secondary
is all in the rookie deal too. So
the most likely outcome for them is a better regular season record than this year when they were just 11-5. They didn't win the division this year, and maybe a playoff lot. That happened to Kansas City just now, and it's happened to a number of teams that sort of win from that wild card spot. The next year they do really well, but they have the bullet on their back in the
Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not only just year 2 of Tom Brady and Bruce Arians' system. It's year 2 of Chris Godwin with Brady, year 2 of Mike Evans with Brady, and I think you saw some of those chemistry issues early in the season.
Year 2 of Antonio Brown with Brady.
I mean, that I do think matters. I really do think that. And then you bring James White back. Run it back, Tampa Bay. Let's run it back.
Plus, last season they got the most WAR per dollar in the secondary among any team in the NFL. That's a little bit of luck, but it's also very good process for them drafting players in the back 7 for the last 3-4 years.
All right, not a lot of news right now, not a lot of signings, but I will be reporting those as I see them come across the timeline. But I want to start now with some of the best available. I think looking at right now, Kenny Golladay is the crown jewel of free agency still left. He was the number 4 overall free agent before people started getting signed, and right now he's the top available unsigned free agent according to PFF's free agency rankings, which, by the way, if you don't have a PFF subscription, go to PFF.com, free agency 30. Save 30% off any PFF sub. Who loses there? Not me, not you. Let's go get that. Kenny Golladay, ideal landing spots. I've said Washington for a little bit. I don't hate Jacksonville if we're trying to get interesting. I don't hate Indianapolis because, Carson Wentz loves a big name, but they have the money to do it. What do you think of those guys?
I'll also throw in the Giants in there. I've been saying the Giants for a while. But I do think of those teams, Indianapolis makes the most sense because they almost have to. With how they went in with this Carson Wentz deal, with the DeForest Buckner deal last year, they haven't used a dime of their cap space, and they're still top 5 in cap space in terms of teams around the league. And Chris Ballard loves him some budget deals. So he's going to be making moves, but he's just not going to be going for the big money guys. But he has shown, like I said, with the DeForest Buckner deal, that if a guy really is a blue chip, he might go and get him. So I think that's still an option on the table.
Wentz's best year in Philly, he had the good year of Alshon Jeffrey, right? The back shoulder, big wide receiver guy, maybe not the most separation, but sort of that guy as the sort of X receiver, and then speed, which Indianapolis has in spades with Pittman and T.Y. Hilton if he were to come back, and also the tight end. So I do think that completes their offense pretty well. I also just love the idea of Ryan Fitzpatrick just pumping targets to Golladay outside the numbers for basically 15 yards downfield all year.
Brad, I think we saw some numbers for Kenny Golladay maybe not being in the $20 million range, closer to the 14 to 16. How much of that is him not being a really good separator, him being more of a contested catch guy, or the injuries? Because he's also a guy that has battled injuries of late.
Yeah, he only played in 5 games last year. He did put up great numbers in all those games he appeared in, but already 28 now, heading up for a second contract. Also, my team is the Dolphins. I think keep an eye on there. They just did not win on the outside or deep downfield at all last year. Devontae Parker is also a bit of a jump ball guy, but I think they're a team to keep an eye on. But yeah, I think it's a mix of both. And maybe he also goes that shorter route like a Corey Davis. But again, it also could be his last substantial contract, so maybe he just bites the bullet and takes 15, 16 per year.
Mike has this take that the Dolphins, for Kenny Golladay, a little bit redundant, right? I mean, I do think that they have a lot of contested catch guys already there. And I know Tua needs a burner. Tua needs a separator, a guy that he can go to consistently.
Burner, but he needs, just like a...
Jakeem Grant's a poor man's Tyreek Hill, according to
Eric Eager on Sundays. If you look at the passing maps for Fitzpatrick, they're red around the sidelines. Mm-hmm. You look at them for Tua from Alabama as well as the NFL, they're red in the middle. They do need sort of a crosser guy as opposed to a sort of back shoulder guy.
You know what Miami
Parker didn't do much once Tua became the starter there.
Yeah. Miami could add Hunter Henry and Juju Smith, get a nice tight end tandem there. Oh, wait, Bill Belichick already paying big money for the 2 tight ends. All right, jumping now to the second best available free agent right now and who's been a hot commodity for, I believe, Indianapolis Colts have been rumored to maybe make a push. Also, San Francisco 49ers to bring him back, and then the Kansas City Chiefs before the Tooney signing. That's Trent Williams, offensive tackle, formerly of the San Francisco 49ers. Also, PFF's highest graded offensive tackle in 2020. He was that good and could be that good as long as he's healthy. You said the floor is top 5 for Trent Williams if he stays healthy in 2021. Do you think he ultimately draws the $20 million APY?
Yeah, I do. I think teams have seen how tackles, the elite ones, how they age gracefully. I mean, Andrew Whitworth's playing to almost 40 now. So a 3-4 year deal for Trent Williams should not realistically put him into any sort of poor decline territory at his age. So I think someone's going to give him that $20+ million. It's going to be either Indy or San Francisco. I think those are the 2 most likely teams at this point.
Indy would be the best fit, in my opinion. Even though San Francisco, he had a ton of success, obviously would continue there if he stays healthy. But Indy next to Quentin Nelson, you've called it Hall of Fame type of double team. Like that would be legit for Indy.
I do think like a dark horse here is Kansas City because they have put together the money, and the Joe Tooney contract is just $4.5 million first year.
Cap-wise, yep.
So I mean, and teams, even some smart ones, respond to the exact last thing that happened to them. It might be a deal that Kansas City at least tries, and especially if it goes on longer, right? Like, is it going on longer because he's holding out for more money, or is it going on longer because the interest is less than we think? Given the fact is like he's just 1 year removed from not having played, and there's more question marks than I think we're all willing to admit.
There were multiple reports last night, too, both nationally and locally, that the Chicago Bears are in this market as well. Obviously, we've discussed a bunch. They're a desperate front office. I think it's also a nice way to pitch Russell Wilson, say, hey, we're going to actually invest in our offensive line for you. Maybe have to kick Charles Leno over to right tackle. But and we discussed the Seahawks letting everyone go. Maybe the Bears try to make a huge trade and sign the best left tackle available.
That's the domino we need to fall, Brad. If we want this live show to go on for another 4 hours, we need Russell Wilson traded the Chicago Bears along with a Trent Williams signing there in Windy City.
Can you be shirtless on camera? Is that all right?
I will get shirtless on camera for that. I will do it. All right, Will Fuller is the next guy on my list I want to talk about. He has probably been a good target for every single team in the NFL. Everyone should add a Will Fuller. Everyone should add speed. And I think before, Brad, I want you to comment on the wide receiver position overall in free agency. We've seen guys like Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne get signed by the New England Patriots, but the top end of the market hasn't necessarily come off the board. Not even Curtis Samuel, Will Fuller, or I guess Corey Davis to the New York Jets. But Kenny Golladay, Will Fuller, still sitting there. 2 guys one coming off a PED suspension, another coming off an injury. Do you think that's what's slowing the process, or are we still just trying to figure out how much are these guys worth?
It's all those things too, but also a huge aspect of this is the last 2 seasons of draft classes. I mean, when there's this many good wide receivers, everyone said last year's was historic, and everyone, Mike obviously can speak to this more, says this one's even better this upcoming year. So if you know that you can get a guy in the first 3 rounds, that you might even have a first-round grade on a guy that you can get in the third, then you're not going to spend $20+ million per year. After Hopkins and Keenan Allen kind of exploded that market last year, why go there if you can just draft a guy?
All right, another rumor here coming from Tom Pelissero of NFL Media. Saints going after Richard Sherman, trying to make a play for Richard Sherman. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they continue to do it. Apparently, Sherman's former DB's coach, Chris Richard, now in New Orleans. Do you think the Saints have enough money to pull a Sherman deal off?
Are they changing schemes? Is that like part of the Richard changeover? Or? Because I don't think he fits. Like he doesn't seem to fit there.
So don't they want to run a lot of man? I don't know if they want to run that with Richard Sherman. I mean,
I don't know.
Well, Aaron Glenn went to Detroit, so Chris Richard now in the mix, so potentially. But Dennis Allen's still there, and I know.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make a ton of sense for me there. I mean, they got to get younger at some spots. They got to find value here. Sherman might be a value, but not because he's young or inexperienced, but because he's got a bad leg.
All right, let's get back to Will Fuller landing spots. I know we talked about why the market maybe is slow, but I know you had a Green Bay Packers starter jacket on upstairs. You took it off for the show. Do you think Green Bay ultimately lands Will Fuller?
Yeah, of course I do. I mean, no, I really don't think that it is ultimately Green Bay, sadly, but I do think you could see Will Fuller with this market at the wide receiver position and with kind of his injury history and obviously the PED suspension, take a prove-it deal. And if you take a prove-it deal, the best place to go would be with a quarterback you know is going to feed you the football. And that would be what he would get in Green Bay, a quarterback who would obviously throw him accurately the football. So I do think that could be a smart move for him at still a young age to put up big numbers this year, prove he can be healthy. And then if he did, obviously the cap bounces back next year and he could be in the mix for a real deal payday again.
You know where Will Fuller's going to go? Chicago Bears. And then we really start to see these dominoes fall. Trent Williams, and maybe we get Allen Robinson, Will Fuller, Trent Williams, Russ. Come let Russ cook in Chicago with Matt Nagy. I don't hate
those
it.
Bears futures ASAP before all that breaks down.
I got all the Bears futures before. I got made fun of for them.
You had to. All right, another free agent I want to talk about, and you've had it's William Jackson, cornerback of the Cincinnati Bengals, maybe on his way out now that the Bengals did sign Chidobe Awuzie. I do think there are better fits for William Jackson than Cincinnati. A man-heavy defense should covet William Jackson's skill set. He hasn't been the player he was when he graded as one of the best quarterbacks in football in 2017, but I still think he has that in him. Do you think a man-heavy team pursues William Jackson, maybe gives him top money?
I think so. I kept saying the Patriots, people are saying they're not done. I think that's more than logical fit with what they've wanted. That's where they've
That would be my favorite signing for the Patriots.
I mean, they've allocated the money in years past to Stephon Gilmore, Darrelle Revis. That's where they've gone when they were willing to spend big money out in free agency, was at the cornerback position. So I could very much see that being the case again this offseason. But I want to know which defense tries to revamp their secondary. There's a lot of mid-tier corners, whether it's in the slot position with Mike Hilton, Desmond King, some safeties in Xavier Woods, now Kareem Jackson on the market, Keanu Neal, and then some aging veterans in Patrick Peterson, Casey Hayward, who have played really well in years past, but maybe on the sort of downside of their career, trying to recapture some magic with them. Someone could completely revamp a secondary for not too much money, for maybe as much money as Frank Clark's going to count against your cap this year, and you could have yourself an entire secondary with the talent available this offseason.
And we did see the Cleveland Browns were interested, or one of the teams interested in Chat Griffin. We saw him sign earlier on the show, 3-year deal worth $44.5 million, $29 million guaranteed with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now that domino has fallen, maybe William Jackson's market becomes a little bit more clear, and Cleveland Browns pursue William Jackson to keep him in Ohio. That would be, I think they should do that.
I think Ronald Darby going to Denver could also spell, Washington football team swoop in on William Jackson. Try to, like you said, bolster
that would make that
secondary.
defense really good.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think he's a great fit,
Landon
though,
Collins.
personally, for what they're going to run their defense. So I think someone like trying to look at this defensive back. Looks like Casey Hayward would be a better fit for them.
I mean, you look at some of the top remaining free agents on PFF.com in the secondary. Number 5, William Jackson. Number 6, Richard Sherman. Scroll a little bit further. Number 8, Desmond King. Cornerback Mike Hilton at 10. There are, like you said, you can revamp the secondary pretty quickly, and you won't have to spend a ton of money. Not as much as maybe a Joe Thuney would cost you for the Kansas City Chiefs. All right, one more name here I wanted to touch on before maybe we break here and wait for more signings. You can follow us along on Twitter. PFF's going to be consistently tweeting out grades analysis of every signing. We also have a deal grader on PFF.com. I encourage you to check that out when we do close. But Not Desmond King. I want to talk a little Juju Smith-Schuster. I keep bringing him up because fantasy relevance, all that stuff, TikTok relevance. Apparently, he could be streaming somewhere else in 2021. I don't think he goes back to Pittsburgh. Where does Juju Smith-Schuster have the most success in 2021, Eric?
Man, I think it has to be an established offense. So, a place with one of those quarterbacks. So, even Seattle, if they had the money, could really use a third target. We talk about Tyler Lockett's yards per route run, precipitously dives second half of both the last 2 seasons. Kansas City would be a focus.
I was going to say, what about Kansas City? I think
Kansas City could be a focus if they're not going to get a tackle or consider wide receiver in the draft. But it has to be an established quarterback. I think he's shown that he's very tethered to the offensive, around him. And if he goes to some place with an elite number 1 wide receiver and a good quarterback, he could be a value. If he goes somewhere where neither one of those things is the case, I don't think he can produce.
When he says that, I think of Green Bay as well. And I know Will Fuller is probably.
I'm not thinking of Green Bay.
I know you're not thinking of Green Bay, but
I would have thought of New England before they signed all the guys that they did sign. But I don't think that's necessarily fit anymore. The teams that really realistically have space and then a need at the wide receiver position, Washington is maybe the one. They could use a number 2 type of guy, and he might not cost as much as maybe some other, maybe like a Will Fuller.
And Fitz is a good enough quarterback to maybe make that work. What about, here's a sneaky one. What about Jacksonville? Jacksonville has money. They're going to have the number 1 quarterback in the draft. And Chris Conley's done nothing. DJ Chark's kind of, I don't know if he's one-dimensional, but he's not a perfect wide receiver, and they got to wait for Shenault to come around.
I'm going to predict this one. I think Las Vegas makes a push. Las Vegas makes a push.
That
They lost Nelson Aguilar to free agency. They're starting receivers right now. Henry Ruggs, who's obviously a disappointment in year 1. Hunter Renfrow, destined for the slot. Then maybe
Can you imagine the TikTok views from Vegas?
Oh, man. Juju should pursue Vegas. If Vegas is interested, go make a play, because I think Vegas could be the best for his off-field career as well. That's going to do it for our live free agency show. Make sure you're tuning in to PFF.com. Also, the PFF YouTube channel. We're going to continue to do a ton of more content, podcasts, live shows, StreamYards, whatever it may be, continuing to attack free agency. Things are going to heat up. Got a lot of names left. Kenny Golladay, Trent Williams, Juju Smith-Schuster could be landing elsewhere, but make sure you're jumping on PFF.com using that promo code. Free agency 30 gets you 30% off any PFF subscription. Until next time, Austin Gale, Mike Renner, Brad Spielberger, Eric Eager, the PFF YouTube channel.